Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I have my book review of the book Stone and Sky by Z.S. Diamante. This is the first book in a epic fantasy trilogy that C.S. Diamante wrote, and the trilogy is called the Stone and Sky trilogy. And I was actually sent this book by the author, and I was really excited to get into it. I loved this cover art. I think that this is gorgeous cover art. It was Katrina Strokoch. I don't know how to pronounce it. I'm sorry, but this is just gorgeous cover art that really caught my eye. And it's a self-pub book series, but I was really excited to get into this, and so I read this recently. It was supposed to be in my September reading, but it kind of got into October. But as I started reading this, I realized that this was very much a nod to classic fantasy. Of course, there's a ton of Lord of the Rings fantasy influences, more than modern fantasy even likes to use. But it specifically felt like I was reading something from like the 1970s or the early 1980s, where the fantasy books were indelibly just had the DNA of Tolkienian fantasy. Like, it almost felt like reading, say, The Sword of Shannara or The Elfstones of Shannara, where it's meant to be like Lord of the Rings. Like, that is an explicit purpose of the book. And so this one, it had these touchstones that just felt like classics. Even though this was written in the 2020s, it felt like classics. One of the reasons is because it has, the fantasy races, which a lot of fantasy books don't have today. There's elves, there's dwarves, there's goblins, there's orcs. That's not too common in a lot of modern fantasy, but I thought it was, and they were treated, for the most part, except for the orcs, they were all treated like the way they would be treated. The dwarves felt like dwarves and dwarf culture. Elf felt like traditional elf culture. Humans felt like traditional human culture. Things like that. Orcs were the one exception to that rule, which I'll talk about in a moment. But it felt like classics. The way that the way that the writer writes the characters, the way that there is like the character dynamics feel very classic in nature, and I think that's what the author was going for, and he nailed it. If that's what he was really going for, and so I thought that it was just very unique in a modern setting, which I really enjoyed. Now, the orcs are the one deviation because the orcs have a lot of personality, and the orcs have like a plot line and a POV, and you get that they're kind of bad guys, but at the same time, some of the orcs aren't really all that bad. And so the orcs have a lot more dynamic and dynamism, which actually would be much more common in modern fantasy. So it's actually a perfect blend of the two, that it has those classic elements while also being like modern elements like the orcs as well. And then, just to me, the book is refreshing because it's not explicit. There's not really any bad language in the book. There's not any explicit scenes in the book. It is very much a book that you could read at pretty much all ages. It's a fun fantasy adventure that anybody could read. Yes, I would say that in between the length and the action scenes, yeah, it's an adult book, but I think kids could older kids could probably enjoy this book too. It really does have that kind of all ages feel to it, which I think makes it appealing that families could read it. The book has a surprisingly large cast for what I was expecting. I was expecting a much smaller cast, but there's a pretty large cast in this. You have like the Griffin Guard, and you have which there's like the guy who was separated from the Griffin Guard, and then there's the guy who's that's Orin. Then you have the guy who's part of the Griffin Guard, Penderin, and then there's the king, and then of the humans, and then you meet, of course, like a gnome who's got like some magic powers, and you meet the dwarf who is just always bragging on his wife and daughter, which I thought was funny. And then you have, and by the way, the description of the dwarf's wife's cooking was really cool. And then you have the orcs and their perspective, and then you have them fighting the different monsters in this book. I just felt like it was a very it was a very fun adventure. It was very tropey overall, but there were still a few surprises in the book. But generally, it was a very tropey book. But I enjoyed it, and it just put a smile on my face because it was, the word I'll use is refreshing. It's a very refreshing book to read. So I had a lot of fun with the book. It doesn't, like, none of the themes really made me think deeply, and it didn't, like, just set itself apart in terms of the story itself. The story itself felt very generic, and so those are two of the things that keep it down, perhaps. And also the character dynamics weren't they weren't anything to write home about. But if you just want a solid, entertaining, fun book, this absolutely fits all those categories. Refreshing, it's appropriate, it's classic, but also modern. It's that's why I think is the big selling point. Is it is a classic feeling book that has a few modern sensibilities that works well for it. That's the biggest selling point of this book that I really like. My overall is, I'm going to give it like a 7.5 out of 10. I had a lot of fun reading it. I intend to get to books 2 and 3 eventually. When I get to them, I don't know because I don't have them yet. But I do have the Preludes collection, which I read and will have reviewed pretty soon. But that is my review of Stone in Sky. If you've read Stone in Sky, let me know your thoughts in the comments section down below. And until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.